Hey guys, honestly I think closed species are inherently unethical. When people usually argue for closed species, they tend to cite the fact that people should be allowed to get credit for their work. And I'm sure smaller artists who have this idea in their heads have good intentions in mind. But at the end of the day, these guys are useful idiots. But to be frank, if you look at the ramifications of what closed species as a standard may lead to, it's a lot more sinister than you may think. Among artists, this concept would only benefit maybe a small minority at the expense of everyone else. Like, you have to take into account how closed species, for instance, is supposed to be enforced. Yeah, sure, whatever, anyone can create a closed species, it's not necessarily exclusive to anyone. But it's inherently reliant on people basically going along with your decision to carve off a little chunk of the Creative Commons and making that your little fiefdom. Like, if a small artist, for instance, created a species that was completely original, right? That wouldn't really mean anything. There just wouldn't be any legitimacy for that claim, since there's nothing preventing someone else from just creating a knockoff of that species, or just claiming it entirely as their own. If someone who's influential or a large artist claimed that species as their own, that would hold a lot more weight. And no, call-out posts aren't really an option for small artists, generally speaking. The effectiveness of a call-out basically is dependent on how many people it can reach, so if you don't have a platform, it doesn't matter. So on top of just being able to steal species with ease, and going back to the idea of larger artists slash influencers having a larger platform, as far as the community is concerned, they created it first, since they're able to reach them more quickly than the smaller influencer, if at all. And no matter how hard the original creator tries to bring out the truth, like, at best, that person would essentially be able to only reach, I don't know, 100 people, for instance, while the larger content creator may be able to reach hundreds of thousands, right? And if you've been in the fandom for long enough, you would realize that our entire justice system is kind of screwed up, right? It's not if you're factually correct, it all depends on how many people are on your side, right? It's a numbers game, basically. And oh boy, the flip side is a lot more interesting. If someone who already had a large following, or who was a large artist, decided to create, I don't know, maybe it's original, maybe it's not, a closed species, right? That sort of claim will hold a lot more weight, as I said earlier in the video. And if someone less influential or smaller decided to make a knockoff of that species, or claim it as their own, the big artist slash influencer would essentially be able to enforce their closed species with force. They can make a call-out post, which is a lot more effective if you have a large audience. And given their platform, they would be able to essentially destroy the offending small artist. You guys probably know what I mean by this. Numbers reign supreme. They could dox them, they could bully them out of the fandom, they can... there's a whole list of things that can happen, but you get the idea. So what, if a large artist or influencer steals from someone who's smaller or a small artist, that's completely fine. But if a small artist steals something from a big artist, by this I mean, closed species, they're evil and they deserve to be dogpiled. By now I hope you actually see the double standard here. It's brutal and sad, but it just happens anyway. You know the Matthew effect, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The same applies to the furry community. And of course no one wants to talk about this. Everyone wants to take the path of least resistance. They just follow what the most influential people say and they just go with the flow, right? People will like you if you lie to them. People will hate you if you tell them the truth. That's why we have all these simps dying on a hill just to further the interest of these influential people who make closed species. I guess this is a good example, I guess a little microcosm of this entire circus. So this big artist basically asks for $1.5 grand, literally enough for, I don't know, maybe even a full suit. And you see this simp willing to pay that much money, which is just mind-boggling. And literally the only thing that's preventing him from just making a copy of that species is the fear of retaliation. From what I see, this Lisandre Cafe guy, he's a nobody, right? Like, he can't really stand up to this sort of thing. So he's just gonna simp and pay the money since he's coerced into that situation. And yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg. It gets a lot worse. I'm gonna cover a big chungus, so I don't know, I might be cancelled. I don't really care, honestly. This entire situation is a minefield, and yeah, you're not really allowed to criticize these guys. And most people take the path of least resistance, but it has to be said. So apparently Primogens sell for hundreds of dollars on average. Since it's an auction system, right? It can go upwards of thousands of dollars. It's basically the former, except it's done at a larger scale. They have some form of blacklist, and they enforce that in the same way that they would do with art theft. And for a person that's very influential in the community, it would hold a lot more weight, and the consequences for opposing them would be much greater. So if you appear on this blacklist, you're likely to get brigaded by a lot of people, and basically be bullied out of the community, or some kind of equivalent. And this is only for creating a knockoff of that character. It's not even claiming that species as your own, right? So imagine how much worse the consequences would be if you claimed that species as your own. I hope that you guys realize now that this entire concept of a closed species only benefits a few people at the end of the day, and basically excludes every one of us from having our own closed species. It applies to them, but it doesn't apply to us. So this argument of people receiving credit for their work isn't entirely true. It would only apply to a tiny minority, which are the large artists, and it would alienate everyone else that wanted to get credit for their work. It's a double standard like everything else in this community. And from what I know, this is abbreviated, but I will say that the faction that was for closed species won out over the faction that was against it, generally speaking. And I would attribute this to, again, the cult of personality, the simping, and influential people are happy to exploit that. Obviously, larger artists have an interest in propagating this sort of thing, since it benefits them the most. They would have the capacity to spread misinformation way more effectively than any of the small artists can, and I feel bad for them. As far as I know, the small artists are losing this battle, since they're so outnumbered. No matter how good their points are, they'll still be overridden by the flood of simps that'll fight on the behalf of these large influencers, right? You guys can probably connect the dots and see why closed species became the norm over not having them. How they won out in that struggle. It just highlights how much these influential people have taken from us peasants. And yeah, this will continue and get worse and worse, and there's nothing we can do about it. So unless these simps all of a sudden grow a brain, nothing's really gonna happen. This trajectory will continue as it is. And if you want to make a closed species, sure you can, but keep in mind that it's not yours. Someone with more influence can just take that away from you if they wanted to. And again, I really appreciate the comments. Just please tell me what you think about the video, whether closed species should be the standard or if they shouldn't. And again, I'll respond to all of them if I can, like the other videos. If you like the video, like it. If you don't like it, just dislike it. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed my videos. So, I guess that's all. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.